A recent article in the magazine called The Cut, entitled Passed Out on Gummies, reflects on the fact that 1 in 5 American children has taken a melatonin product in the last 30 days to fall asleep. The article came up on my Instagram feed. I read it and I was fascinated not only by the content of the article, but by the comments section. People were at each other's throats. Parents yelling at other parents, non-parents yelling at parents. There were people on every side of the spectrum, whether they had used melatonin on their children and had amazing results, or they couldn't fathom doing that and thought it was quote unquote child abuse. Everyone had an opinion and no one was afraid to share it. And I knew the moment that I read that comment section that I had to do an interview on this podcast about melatonin. Now, I don't do interviews on this podcast typically unless the subject is super fascinating or it's a topic that has in some way affected my life. When it comes to melatonin, I have 3 young children, so you can bet that this topic has absolutely affected my life. And I want to tell you a little bit about how before I dive into this interview with sleep psychologist Josh Tall, because I felt when I was listening back to the interview that it wasn't necessarily obvious that I had used this substance on either myself or my children. And I wanted to make sure that you, as the audience, understood that. And that I'm really coming at this interview wanting more information. So let me backtrack for a second here. I had my first of 3 daughters almost 8 years ago. And when she was born, melatonin was not something that was readily and openly available as a vitamin for children. Now, if you go to any local grocery store, Target, the pharmacy, you're going to see melatonin products marketed specifically for kids from brands that we know and trust, like Zarbee's, like Ollie's, like Mary Ruth's. This has become a very commonplace and accepted item and vitamin to be sold in our society today. And that has happened very, very quickly, which has really drawn my fascination, because when Selma was first born, not only was this not available, but if somebody were to say, hey, I'm giving my child melatonin, it would be met with quite a bit of backlash. This wasn't something that we thought of as being safe for children. Now, flash forward to now, it is very common. In fact, The Cut in its article mentions that 1 in every 5 children has taken a melatonin product in the last 30 days in order to fall asleep. It is quite common for children to either take a melatonin product occasionally, frequently, or regularly in America. And that has happened so quickly that, of course, I find myself curious and wanting to ask all the questions about it. I have also gone and done my own research prior to recording this podcast. I've talked to my own pediatrician. I've read a lot of articles. I've read a lot of research about the effect that melatonin has on children, because perhaps like you, I have 1 or more children who struggles to sleep, who struggles to fall asleep and or stay asleep. And that has affected my own sleep in such a way that it's taken away from my ability to do what I need to do during the day. And it's actually taken away from my kids' ability to really enjoy their day because they're so tired. And so I have looked into why my child might struggle with sleeping and how small amounts of melatonin could actually help 1 or more of my children. And so I'm not going to tell you what I do for each of my children when it comes to giving them melatonin, because I think that's their private information. But I did want to come on here and just share that I have absolutely use this. I'm not Andrew Huberman. I'm not coming on here and telling you that you absolutely should never use this substance on your children, that it's terrible, that it's dangerous. What Josh really confirms in this episode is that melatonin, actually, we don't know that much about the effects of melatonin on children. And he also talks about when melatonin can be appropriate in different scenarios and a lot of the questions that a lot of parents have. I think it's very common for parents to perhaps want to use melatonin, not know what the backlash of that could be, really want to know more. And so my goal on this episode was to provide that information. If you're an adult, and even if you don't have kids, you may benefit from some of the information in this episode as well, in terms of how melatonin affects us and how to create good, positive, healthy sleep habits. So without any further ado, here is my interview with Dr. Josh Tall. Welcome back to I Just Have to Say with Laura Max. I have a very special guest on the show today, Dr. Josh Tall. He is a psychologist, but not just any psychologist, a sleep psychologist, and not just any sleep psychologist, but also my cousin's amazing husband. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thank you for having me, Laura. I'm excited to be here and talk sleep.
Well, the first time I met you and found out what you do for a living, I was fascinated. And because you have two children and I have three, I have never really had a quiet moment to ask you about what you do and why you do it and all of your insight and wisdom. Sleep is our cultural obsession right now. And I can only imagine that has contributed to some busyness in your private practice. You go to Target, there's an entire aisle not just dedicated to vitamins, but sleep vitamins, sleep gummies for adults and children alike, which is something I have noticed since becoming a parent almost 8 years ago. And I knew I had to have you on the show when I got an Instagram notification from The Cut recently, which is a publication called Passed Out on Gummies. And the intro line of Passed Out on Gummies is all around the world. Children are going to sleep with a bedtime story, a pat on the back, and a heavy dose of melatonin, a potent dose of melatonin. This is something, if you're hearing this and you are not a parent, might sound absolutely foreign and insane. And it might also sound that way if you are one. But like it or not, melatonin is widely available for children's consumption for the last several years. It is distributed by brands like trusted brands, Zarbee's, Ollie's. I want to know what your thoughts are on the fact that 1 in 5 American children has taken a sleep gummy, if you will, in the last 30 days, that this has become a part of our nighttime routine. And I also want to talk about why that is and what's going on in American society. I mean, this is really only happening in America. You need a prescription in Europe to give somebody melatonin. What are the underlying causes? Because we love to talk about symptoms, but we don't often talk about the cause. Just right off the bat, I mean, what do you think about children taking melatonin?
Right. So it has become a lot more common. I think there is a time and a place for melatonin with children. I mean, let's actually start at the beginning and talk about the history of melatonin. So, melatonin is a hormone secreted in the body, right? And that hormone helps regulate our circadian rhythm. So, we have a clock in our brain, and that clock tells us what time to be awake and what time to sleep. The term circadian rhythm actually means any system in our body that uses time to regulate it. So the main one that we think of when we say circadian rhythm is sleep. And so in the morning, our body releases alerting hormones, stimulating hormones to help us stay alert and focused. And then at nighttime, our body releases melatonin to help us get ready for bed. Now, melatonin, when it's released in the brain, does not make you sleepy. What it does is it turns off your normal alerting hormones to allow sleep to come through. Meaning, right, that melatonin as a sleeping pill for adults is not such a good sleeping pill because it doesn't work very well. It's because if you're not tired or if you have other things going on like anxiety or things like that, it's not going to do much.
Wait a second. Back up for a minute. What do you mean it doesn't work very well? Because as a test dummy myself, I will say that sometimes it doesn't work very well because I don't sleep all the way through the night, but it definitely helps me fall asleep when I take like 1 milligram. The amounts on the shelves for adults are like 10, sometimes 20 milligrams of melatonin.
So what melatonin can help with, right, is it can help what it was actually developed for shifting your timing, right? So let's say you try to go to bed at 10 o'clock, but you're not falling asleep until 2 in the morning. You can take melatonin to help you fall asleep earlier, right?
Right.
But
But not necessarily sleep through the night.
right. And the way it was developed, it was actually developed at 0.25 milligrams, 0.5 milligrams. That's when they were trying to find a time shifting medication. And I believe, to get around the patents, they came out with 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, and sold it as a sleeping pill. So it doesn't actually add anything to take more.
It actually takes, from what I've had conversations with my friends about this. I think less is more when it comes to melatonin. If you take
Mm-hmm.
too much of it, I'm going to be up in the middle of the night. If you were to take it, how much of it would you take?
I would take like half a milligram, right? 1
Okay.
milligram. And I would take it for jet lag, right? That's a good use of
Right.
it.
Right.
Also, there's something called social jet lag, meaning it's like you stay up late on Friday night and sleep in. I haven't done that in a long time. But if one were to, right, stay up late Friday night and sleep in, stay up late Saturday night and sleep in, you can actually move your circadian rhythm over a, right by a couple hours. So then when you try to go to bed at an earlier time, you're right. You're not tired at that time, right? And that's problematic.
So why do you think, I remember hearing about melatonin for the first time was actually in a jet lag situation. I was traveling to London in college. I was 20 years old. A friend of mine said, "Hey, I've taken this thing called melatonin." Back then
Mm-hmm.
it was only offered in tablets, no gummies, only for adults.
Mm-hmm.
I take it on the airplane when I go to London. It really helps me sleep on the plane. So I took it and I was blown away. And it was marketed because it is a natural substance. It's a hormone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've always believed that that is what's contributed to its general perception, like the way that we perceive it as being so safe. I'm not about to give my kid an Ambien, but melatonin,
Mm-hmm.
sure, it's a hormone. Is there a downfall to people taking it when they are children, with any, either occasionally or with any type of frequency?
So you asked earlier, what do you mean it doesn't work? It doesn't work compared to a placebo, right? So there's only a marginal effect relative to a placebo as a sleeping pill, because usually people who have trouble sleeping become anxious about it. And when you have a lot of anxiety, your body is in fight or flight. And so your body keeps you awake so that you deal with the danger that it perceives. Melatonin, if it's all it's doing is making you less alert, it's not necessarily going to turn off the alerting parts of anxiety. It will turn off the alerting parts of wakefulness, but not necessarily the anxiety, right? So it will not help you sleep in those situations where you're very anxious, or if you've overslept recently, right? And then you're not as sleepy. So for children, right, there are some kids where there's some evidence, right, that, so mainly kids who are neurodiverse, right? So kids that are on the autism spectrum, kids who have ADHD, there's some evidence that melatonin helps, that there might be a circadian rhythm abnormality in these types of issues. And what melatonin does is it helps to correct that in low doses for children. There is no evidence, however, that, well, we don't know, right? Melatonin is a fairly new supplement. We don't know what happens if you give it to children, neurotypical children, every single night for a long time, right? And so, problem number one is we don't know. There are no studies on it, which then makes it a really scary thing to do long term. Number two is, right, the question is, what is the issue that it's treating? Because we also know that there are really good treatments for kids who have trouble sleeping, neurotypical kids who have trouble sleeping. And in terms of putting in a foreign supplement or making a behavioral change, which is harder to do, but less side effects, right? I personally would recommend doing that one, right?
So, what are some of those things that you can do to help a child who's neurotypical that struggles to sleep?
So the first step is trying to understand what is the issue that's keeping them awake. So, for example, a child can have sleep apnea. A child can be having caffeine unintentionally late at night or in the afternoon. Sometimes, and many times, right, it could be an issue of a bedtime routine that at a certain point, unintentionally, the parents and the child created a situation where the child depends on the parent's presence for going to sleep. So a parent will stay and sing a song or rub their back or something like that. And the problem then becomes the parent, want like can't do that every night
Wants
for
to
half an
leave,
hour or an hour or two
except that
hours.
I do. Yeah.
I know, I know, right? And the other
Mhm.
problem is that most kids, if there is if they require something to fall asleep at the beginning of the night, will also require the same thing to fall back asleep in the middle of the night, and which becomes a very hard, long process. The other issue that I see in parents and kids with sleeping issues is when it becomes a power struggle. And so there's a refusal to go to sleep, which is a separate issue that can also be addressed. And then also, there can be issues of anxiety, fears at night, bedtime fears, it can be addressed as well.
So I'm listening to you say all this, and I've got a child who, my oldest, of course, the guinea pig, started out her life learning so much about infant sleep, Josh, that I taught a
Mm-hmm.
class on it.
There you go.
And now she is my kid that I lay with every single night. And you just said a half an hour, and I was like, oh, that sounds short.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely something that I do every night, and it's just part of our lives. And
Yes.
do you listen to somebody like me, okay? My kid's almost 8, and think, yeah, there's something you can do where you'd be able to tuck her in and say goodnight. I mean, I can't even wrap my head around that reality, honestly, Josh.
Look, I am not going to sit here and judge, especially because I've had my kids' fair shares of sleeping issue. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. I've had my 9-year-old tell me, Daddy, you're a sleep doctor. Tell me what to do to sleep. Right.
Oh, that's
I
amazing.
know.
You have that though. We're like a lawyer and a graphic designer. Like I've got
Yeah.
I have no clout in the sleep world.
Right. But no, but I get more pressure because like then my
Right,
daughter
right.
is saying like, "Come on, tell me what to do. Let me," right? And
Yeah.
then recently my son, my 6-year-old has had trouble sleeping where he would require me or require my wife, and he would call us in and wouldn't go to sleep. So it comes up for everyone a lot of times.
Right.
Like it
Sure.
really does. It comes up a lot. And so that's where it's listen, it's a lot of what happens. It's like when you're in life and you're living life, and you know that if you stay there for an hour, they'll fall asleep versus like a 4-hour battle. You're going to choose the 1 hour of staying there, especially if you're tired, you had a long day, and you want to just like get to watching your shows or doing catching up on work, whatever it is. It takes a lot of work to change these behaviors, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I don't blame any parent who is saying, I don't have the time or energy to do this right now. Because I've been there where I didn't have the time or energy, and it made more sense to allow my kid to just come into my bed or for me to go and stay there, right? It
Yeah.
happens
Yeah.
all the time.
It's and we have I mean, I could tell some stories right now about the way things vacillate and the what we have time for and what we don't have time for, but needless to say, I mean, bedtime at my house sort of revolves around like what everybody needs and then
Hmm.
how much how much energy do I have left at 7:30, 8:30, 9 o'clock after I've been up
Mhm.
since 6 a.m., right?
Exactly.
It's an insane time to be alive. I think when you have little children is bedtime. But going back to this conversation, I was reading this article in the cut about these gummies, and what fascinated me so much more than the article, Josh, was the comments section.
Mhm.
So I'm sure you can imagine you've got half of the commenters like, oh my god, American parents are terrible, they should have their children repossessed, who
Wow.
does this? I mean, just vicious, just horrible, who could be so lazy? I'm like, lazy, I
Oh
mean,
my
are you
gosh.
kidding me? I don't like. And then on the other side is just fierce defensiveness, like, yeah, well, why don't you try having a child on the spectrum who doesn't go to bed until 2
Mhm.
a.m. What really struck me was that people, A, don't really understand what's going on for other people, and B, I think what you were saying before about how there is some research that contributes to the fact that melatonin can actually have a positive, or there could be a circadian rhythm issue in children who are on the spectrum or who have ADHD. There's so much that we don't know.
Mhm.
But what I'm struck by is this is such a uniquely American debate that we're having right now. And what is it like really about our culture? Because I know what my answer would be, Josh, but what do you think it is that kind of makes us like, you've got 1 in 5 children taking melatonin? I'm going to guess regularly, and I'm going to guess it's more than that. I mean, what do you think it is about our society that contributes to that?
I think we do. My guess would be, that we live in a time period where there are a lot of medications that are there to help us. I mean, you have a lot of parents taking sleeping pills as well, and adults taking sleeping pills. And up until now, that was the way we thought about treating sleep, and still do mostly, right? That, hey, you need to take a medicine, or and that's going to help you sleep. So of course it's in the kids see the parents doing it, or the parents think, oh well, I take something, so why not? You want that sort of shortcut, right? It really is a shortcut, and one that is effective for kids, like at least in the short term, that you give it to them and it does really help. Like it's something that works. So why wouldn't you do it, especially if you
Right. I
think
mean,
it's natural, right?
it's natural. It's all over the shelves. It absolutely
Hmm.
does work.
Right,
I know I have.
marketing, that's also right.
What?
Yeah,
It's everywhere. It's marketed as safe. It's marketed by companies that
non-addictive,
tout
yeah.
that safety as non-addictive. And I know for me, like, I have one child who has a very, very hard time settling at night. And so I started, they were recommended to me by someone. I started to use them, and I was like, I'm going to use these every once in a while when I really need it. Well, slowly but surely that became like, wait, this is incredible. This is
Hmm.
apparently safe. And you go right to bed now, and it doesn't take 3 hours. So I called my pediatrician and I said, what are your thoughts on this? And he immediately said, I really don't like it. And I was actually really surprised by how black and white
Oh
he
yeah.
was about it. And he said, this is why. And he said, there have been studies that say that um, prolonged use of melatonin can make it so our bodies stop producing the
Right,
amount that we
right,
actually
right. There's
need.
yeah, then you need it more and more,
Then
right?
you need it, right? And so I'm thinking, okay, well, then obviously this isn't something I'm going to use in a prolonged way, whatever that means. But this article is also talking about how difficult it can be to say, okay, here's something I'm going to do every once in a while that works
Mhm,
perfectly. And I have 2 more hours where
mhm,
my kid is sleeping every night. My kid's honestly in a better mood the next day because she slept really well in a
mhm.
lot of cases. Um, and I'm like, there's so much information that we don't have.
Right.
And then I've got other, my friend has a pediatrician in New York, and he's like, yeah, it's totally fine to take it every day. So
Mhm.
I'm so fascinated by how little we know about something that's so widely available.
Right. No, it's so true and so pushed, like, in a big way, definitely here on the East Coast. I
It
see it
is. Tell me more
a lot.
about that, because I live in like the middle of the mountains, so I don't really know how this is being like received by the rest of society. Is this like a common thing?
Yeah, I think, there are a lot of people who use it nightly or on special occasions or things like that. I think that it's just, yeah, everyone has it or uses it, so it's commonly promoted. And I don't know. I haven't asked my uh, pediatrician, but I assume a lot of people are asking their pediatricians, or if they're not asking them, then they're just doing what they want to do,
Right.
because it's a vitamin. Why not? Right.
It's a vitamin, right? It's safe. It's right there in front of us. So let's say, we have young children. You asked me before I we started this conversation, what my thoughts were on sleep training and am I really against it? And the truth is I tried it with one of my children and it just there were elements of it obviously that just did not work for where any of us were at the time. And there are so many different ways to quote unquote sleep train a child. But you have two of your own young children. What
Hmm.
are some of the ways that you felt you've fostered really good sleep habits for them?
So I don't want to be a hypocrite. I have used melatonin occasionally at a very low dose. I want to make sure that that is said. Like if for example, my son has just been doing really poorly with sleep and we have a babysitter coming, I'm going to choose my own mental health in that moment and use a and
I love that you give it to the babysitter because I'm
yeah.
like, when I have a babysitter, I'm like, oh, great,
Oh,
you
you
get to
do
do
it.
this.
Yeah, you do.
I save that for me.
Oh, yeah. Well, so there are certain times, not every time we have a babysitter, but if we're in a bad
Right.
period, um,
Yeah.
I think so. For example, with my daughter, when she would ask us a lot, like, "Oh, I want another hug," or "Can you go get me a new glass of water?" Or "I need to go to the bathroom," or this or that. And what we decided to do was basically tell her that you have two requests. That's it. Like, you have two requests or passes and you can use them however you want. After that, we can't come and we can't come to you. So we it doesn't mean you ignore them, right? You come and you say, like, "I love you, it's time for sleep," and you leave and you say, like, "We're here, but I'm not fulfilling any requests." And so usually that meant before bedtime saying, "Okay, Ella, like, why don't you think about what the things that you want to do or need for bed, because you're only going to get two passes later." And um, there is some there. This is actually like a clinical intervention that you can do. I found out later. But what they say is what you're trying to do is to get them not to use the passes. So you incentivize and you say, "Hey, if you don't use the passes in the morning, you can trade it in for a small prize, or you can trade it in for choosing what we're eating for dinner the next night, or choosing what movie the family sees, or something like that."
And is this something that you still do with her every night, or eventually she just like got the hang of it
No,
and
she
doesn't need
got
the
the
passes
hang of
anymore?
it at this point. Um,
Yeah.
I think we've sort of made it a part of the bedtime routine. So like usually we like to read before bed, and
Yeah.
so my wife will read to one child, and I'll read to the other one, and then we'll switch and we'll do a cuddle, and then that's it usually
That's it.
for
Wow.
Ella. For Judah's been uh, having a lot of trouble lately, the last couple months, and so his bedtime routine is a little bit longer. He'll have a little massage and a song, and it will after the reading. And we try to do like, "Oh, you have one more request," but each kid is different. It didn't really work well with him.
Yeah.
We tried also doing like the fading of the parental presence. So where it's like, "Okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to sit on the chair next to your bed. I'm not going to sit in bed with you." And then the next night it's, "Okay, I'm going to come in, but I'm going to stand by the doorway." And showing that that they are okay. And essentially, right, you're teaching self-soothing, right? Coping skills, strategies that they can handle their feelings on their own as well.
I think that's really important. I think as my children get older, I can see how important that is. And I can also see how innately different they are. One of my children would love the 2-pass thing. The other one
Mhm.
would absolutely like get a giant cut on their head after they'd used the 2 passes. And then
Oh
we would
yeah,
like
there you go.
not be able to explain to that child, oh my God, if you're bleeding, you need to come out. when you when you get the third one, like the rules would just be so complicated. But
Mhm.
I think, there's so many different schools of thought around sleep. And I follow people who are all about, if your children really want you to be there, then if you can, stick
Mhm.
around. I
Yeah.
even had, a therapist tell me that, like, if your child really needs you, is there any way you can stay there? And I'm still doing that, like 3.5 years later. And I
Mhm.
will say that it's definitely, I mean, it's a huge commitment. It's sort of one of those things you were talking about, parents being too exhausted to necessarily make a change. By the time I've gotten to that
Mhm.
point of the evening, I'm like, all right, well, this is what we're doing again. But I think these tools that you mentioned are really useful. And I think the other thing that I really wanted to bring you on to talk about is, we have the reason why melatonin specifically is widely distributed in the US, for example, whereas you need a prescription for it in Europe, is that we've branded it as a food.
Mhm.
So a lot of people don't know that it's a hormone, and a lot of people don't necessarily know what it is, or anything about it. There was
Especially
in
as a
this
gummy,
article,
right? That's what makes it.
especially as a gummy. And in this article, they talked about lawsuits against Zarbee's, against Ollie, because there were something like 3 times the amount of melatonin that was specified in each gummy.
Mhm.
Um, do you ever think about what that's going to look like in a few years when we perhaps know more? Because I imagine we're going to have kids who are teenagers who have been taking
Right.
this for so long. And one of the concerns is like delayed puberty, which is definitely probably what stops me from using melatonin more regularly. I absolutely do
Oof.
use it, just like you said. I feel like I introduced this podcast making it sound like I didn't. I totally do. But I think the regularity, I'm afraid of because of that component. Do you think
Mhm.
we're going to know more?
I mean, definitely. I worry more even about it's going to be hard to know, right? How do you attribute
Yeah.
one thing, control for a lot of different variables, right? Um, I think that we'll have to see. I know, for example, only recently there's been a reckoning with other sleeping pills, right? Where you have, for example, people who have been taking Ambien for 30 years and now have like mild cognitive impairment, like a pre-dementia kind of thing, and their neurologist says, "Oh yeah, that's probably because of you've been taking Ambien every night to sleep for 30 years." Or, for example, you have people recently learning that taking histamines for um, 20, 30 years is bad, antihistamines. So, for like Benadryl or Advil PM or all of these medications, Unisom, those also taking them for a long period of time recently have been shown to cause a dementia process. So it can be quite scary.
Well, I mean, I actually hadn't heard of any of those studies, but it makes sense. It's like, I think since the dawn of parenting time, I think parents have been trying to find ways to get their children to sleep on nights where they won't.
Oh yeah.
2 generations ago, it was a paper towel soaked in brandy or whatever. I mean, like it was something we were doing something. Also, you've got so many people in our generation who were telling these like really sad stories about how anxious they were going to bed at night because their parents weren't there, and now they want their kids to have
Hmm.
a different experience. So I think where we are now is, yeah, we've all like stuck around and we've decided maybe to stay with our kids until they fall asleep or whatever. And a lot of the time that can be really hard. And now we have this sort of thing at our disposal, which I don't necessarily think is bad. I just wonder about using it regularly, for obvious reasons, and just that there's so much that we don't know. What do you like? You see patients in your practice, obviously, every day, all the time. And I think there's been an increased struggle with sleep. I almost feel like since COVID. Do you find that that tends to be directly related to anxiety for most people, or why do people struggle with sleep so much?
No, I mean, adults or children?
Adults, when they become adults.
Adults, right? It can be a number of things. So definitely in COVID, we saw people working from home a lot more. And when they were working from home, what ends up happening is they were spending a lot more time in bed and they were shifting their sleep schedules, which can lead to, again, like a circadian issue rather than like a sleep anxiety issue. Um, but usually what ends up happening is when you have trouble sleeping, you start to worry about it. So whatever causes the trouble can lead to worries about sleep, and then you have a pretty vicious cycle, right? Because you're worrying about sleep, and then you don't sleep, and then you don't sleep, so you worry about it, and it becomes a a new reality for you. And then usually what happens with adults is they'll try a whole bunch of different things to sleep. Like there's even more things for adults than there are for kids. It's like buy a new mattress or meditations or medications or go to bed early, go to bed late. You're doing it wrong. There's so many ways to do it wrong. And so what ends up happening is it's like what you're trying to do, all these things that you try become a vehicle for the insomnia, bringing it into the bed, bringing it into the sleep experience. So then you're waking up even when you're sleepy, and you're having trouble trying to sleep even when you're sleepy.
You were in an article recently where the author was talking about our cultural obsession with sleep at the moment. I mean, sleep is having a moment right now. We are crazy about it and how important it is, and it is really important. But you were talking about taking some of that pressure off and letting it be okay. Like if you're watching a show late at night, I feel like I read this a little while ago now, Josh, so refresh my memory, but it was like it's okay. Like let it be okay. It doesn't have to look perfect. If you don't get a perfect amount of sleep one night, like your body's going to correct that.
Hmm. Well, I think we got to a place, right? If we look at the history again, people used to really not care about sleep. It was really something that
You'll
was,
sleep when you're
yeah, you'll
dead,
sleep
right?
when you're dead. Like it's not a big deal if you don't sleep. And then what happened? We ended up uh, realizing, wait a second, this sleep is so important. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with us? Like we made a huge mistake with this. We really do need to sleep, and it's really important, and it's really bad if we don't sleep. So the pendulum swung in the other direction, right? Where now we care too much about sleep, and we have a lot of people who can't sleep because they're putting pressure on themselves to sleep, unfortunately. And so what we need to find that middle ground, right? There's no perfect way to sleep, and we shouldn't live to sleep, right? We sleep to live. So we should use sleep to help us live and have a good life, right? Not to not to revolve our whole life around sleep. So yeah, if you're watching a show and it's going to be, you're enjoying this movie or this show, this experience, and it's rewarding and meaningful for you, you should watch the movie and finish it. And yeah, you'll get a little less sleep, but the following night you'll sleep more. And similarly, if you have an event that's important to you, go to the event. Live your life, right? Sleep is there and will still be there every single night. You don't need to prioritize sleep every single night like that.
You would think that that would be a commonly understood thing, that you should go out and live your life,
Uh
but I
huh.
totally understand that it's not anymore. It's like I'm anxious when I stay up reading, but gosh, when I have a book that's that good that I wanna stay up until 1 in the
Yeah,
morning reading it, that's like the sauce of
that's
life.
special. Yeah. What
That's
what is
special.
that
What's
book? Tell me now. I want to read
so good. Well, I can't remember the last one that
it.
kept me up that late, but what's really not the sauce of life, Josh,
Mm.
is being kept up by a newborn
Oh yeah,
or a
that's
new
hard.
baby.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that it takes something like 6 years or something for a woman to recover from all the sleep that they lose with each child. That sounds kind of
Wow,
severe.
that's a lot.
Would you agree with that? Does that sound kind of extreme to you?
I mean, I'm not sure how to quantify it. I know that knowing that is probably not good for sleep
Right? Knowing that is probably not,
or for
probably
having
gives us a
children.
lot of
Yeah.
anxiety. But what are, I've always wondered this. I'm in awe of what I'm capable of when I have a new baby. I've stayed awake, I feel like for weeks,
Hmm.
with little bits, with naps here and there. Obviously the consequences of this, the short-term consequences of this are that I put my keys in the refrigerator and I put orange
Hmm.
juice in my salad. But aside from forgetting mostly everything, which is what happened this last time, are there long-term consequences to that type of sleep deprivation if you're only experiencing it? Let's say I've had 3 kids now, so I would say for 3 6-month intervals I've been that sleep deprived. Are there long-term consequences to that?
So remember, right, what the when the researchers started realizing that sleep was important, the what they were trying to uh, right fix was a societal underfocus on sleep. And what they wanted people to do was care more about sleep and prioritize it, right? Which means make sure to give yourself enough time to sleep. It doesn't mean make sure to sleep every minute that you give yourself enough time to sleep. So, for example, I had a friend who was a lawyer and had young kids. So he'd come home from work at around 5, and then he would be, with the kids and doing dinner and playing until 8. Then he'd go back on his computer and he would do more work from like 8, 9 until 12 at night. And then he would take an hour to relax and to de-stress, and then he would wake up at 5, 6 in the morning the next morning. So, and he would say, okay, it's all right. I will catch up on the weekends, sleep in one day. So, in terms of the health of like the health issues with doing that, that could be really dangerous for your health if you're doing that for decades, right? In terms of people like you and me who have periods of time where kids are less regulated, so there's one of them is sick, and or one of them is having a tough transition to kindergarten or whatever it is, that's not going to cause right horrible health issues. So no one got horrible health issues from having less than ideal amounts of sleep, right? It's the people who chronically gave themselves less.
I think the whole world, especially new parents or just parents in general, need to know what you said, because I think we're living in this really, really interesting time where not only are we getting up with our kids in the middle of the night like every parent ever has before us, but we're also feeling like we're doing something wrong when our
Hmm.
kid wakes us up in the middle of the night that we're awake. And it's the weirdest feeling. It's like, oh, I need, like, my kid actually has a fever or something's going on. And also, I'm going to have a terrible day tomorrow, inevitably, because I didn't sleep. The more I've put that idea to the side, Josh, the more I realize that that's actually not true. I'm capable of a lot more than I realize
Oh
on
yeah.
very little sleep.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Totally. Because why? Because you're anxious, right? Even being
Yeah.
anxious, right? The next day you're going to be a lot more able to overcome that tiredness to deal with your life, which is
Right.
positive. Yeah.
Which is positive. Exactly. So, as a sleep psychologist, Josh, is there anything that you feel like you come up against with your patients all the time that you want people to know about sleep, that you think the world could benefit from having a better understanding of when it comes to our sleep, be it for children or adults?
Yeah, I think the main ideas I want to say is that prioritize sleep, but don't over prioritize it. I think for adults and for parents, you should know there are treatments that work that don't require medication, and which means that even if things get off kilter for a little bit, you can get them back on. And for parents, children are very resilient, and are really good at changing behaviors and learning new things. They're like little sponges, right? So it is important to use that for good, and use that to help them sleep better. And it's okay also, parents, if you're not ready right now to do that, as long as you prioritize it, and you make time for it later. That's amazing. That's really good. That's a step ahead. So give yourself a break, right? And then if you're an adult also, right, there are treatments that work. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is what I do, is hugely effective. It's about 80% of people get better in the research. So there's treatments that work that do not require medication. And there's hope out there. You will sleep again, and you can trust your body. It will catch on. So
Ah,
listen to your body, you know.
listen to your body, just like we tell our kids. I love
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Josh Tall. It was an honor having you, and I really appreciate all of your wisdom and insight. And you have been listening to I Just Have to Say with Laura Max. I look forward to joining you again next time.